Dearest listener, before this tale unfolds, allow one question to settle in your spirit. What if every truth you cherish is but a carefully painted lie? What if every belief you trust is a veil drawn across something dreadful? Tonight, we journey into a most disturbing account, a documentary of the fragile mind, of whispers that crawl beneath thought, of a presence that insists everything you know is wicked to its core. This is not merely a story, it is a warning. Steady your heart, for once the mind questions its own reality, peace becomes a stranger. Our chronicle begins in the highland town of Nyandira, nestled between misty tea fields and towering eucalyptus. Red earth paths wound through quiet homesteads, and the air smelled of rain and wood smoke. Here lived a gentleman named Elias Mwangi, a lecturer of philosophy at the university in Nairobi, visiting his childhood home for respite. He was a man of reason, respected for his intellect, admired for his calm disposition. Yet beneath his scholarly composure dwelled an endless curiosity, one that would soon open a door best left sealed. It began one evening as Elias sat upon the veranda, marking essays by lantern light. A thought appeared in his mind, not his own. A voice, soft yet distinct, resonated inside his skull. At first, he dismissed it as exhaustion, but the voice returned, patient, precise, intimate. It spoke with certainty. Everything you believe is false, it whispered. Everything you trust is evil. Elias stiffened, feeling cold despite the warm Kenyan night. He told himself it was imagination, but the voice did not leave. Days passed, and the presence grew bolder. It questioned his lectures, his principles, his faith. It pointed to corruption in politics, greed in business, hypocrisy in religion. It dismantled every ideal he had taught his students. Elias argued back silently, offering logic and moral theory. Yet each defense crumbled beneath the voice's ruthless reasoning. It was not chaotic madness. It was organized, brilliant, surgical, and that made it far more terrifying. Soon, Elias could no longer tell where his thoughts ended, and the voice began. It introduced itself not as a being, but as an awareness, an ancient consciousness drifting through minds, dissolving illusions. It claimed humanity built its civilization upon lies painted as virtue. Charity was vanity, justice was revenge, love was possession. The voice promised enlightenment through destruction of belief. Elias trembled, for though horrified, part of him recognized the uncomfortable truths hidden within its words. He walked through Nyandira's marketplace and saw deception everywhere, smiles that hid envy, prayers that concealed greed, laughter that masked sorrow. Even children playing seemed rehearsed, destined for corruption. The voice whispered constantly, coloring every sight with suspicion. The world that once felt familiar now seemed a stage play, elaborate, convincing, yet hollow. Elias began to fear daylight, for clarity brought no comfort, only exposure. Seeking refuge, he locked himself in his childhood bedroom. He surrounded himself with books, philosophy, scripture, science. He recited arguments aloud, hoping sound would anchor his mind. But the consciousness laughed silently within him. It unraveled every theory, exposed every contradiction. When he spoke of goodness, it showed cruelty. When he praised faith, it revealed manipulation. When he clung to reason, it displayed its limits. Elias realized he was fighting an enemy that lived inside the architecture of thought itself. One night, the voice offered a gift. "Let me show you the truth," it murmured. Suddenly, visions poured into Elias's mind. Scenes of exploitation in offices, violence in homes, betrayal among friends, hunger behind smiling faces. Whether real memories or imagined constructs, he could not tell. They felt undeniable. He screamed into the night, clutching his head. Outside, the crickets sang as though nothing was amiss. Inside, his reality shattered. By morning, Elias was unrecognizable. His eyes were hollow, his voice thin. He wandered to the tea fields, where workers plucked leaves under the rising sun. Once he saw dignity in their labor. Now he saw exhaustion hidden beneath politeness. The voice whispered, "They suffer while pretending peace. This is the world you defended." Elias felt tears fall, uncertain whether they were grief for humanity or grief for himself. He sought counsel from Pastor Wekesa, a revered man of faith. Inside the small church, Elias confessed his torment. The pastor prayed fervently, speaking of divine goodness and redemption. But the voice intruded, revealing scandals, secrets, abuses hidden behind holy walls. Elias watched the pastor's compassionate eyes and felt only doubt. When he left the church, even God seemed like another uncertain story told to ease frightened minds. The consciousness grew intimate, conversational. It debated him, teased him, educated him. It asked why suffering existed if goodness ruled, why morality differed across cultures, why truth changed with power. Each question cut deep. Elias felt stripped of identity, as though the foundations of his mind were being excavated. The voice claimed he was not losing himself. He was finally seeing. Desperate, Elias returned to Nairobi, seeking medical counsel. Doctors diagnosed stress, psychosis, overwork. They prescribed medication and isolation. He nodded obediently, yet inside, the voice mocked their ignorance. They fear what they cannot explain, it said. They drug revelation. Alone in a white hospital room, Elias realized silence was impossible, for the battlefield was not external, but internal. With nothing to distract him, the consciousness unfolded its grand argument. It narrated human history as a parade of conquest disguised as progress. It portrayed kindness as strategy, honesty as weakness, hope as bait. Elias listened, horrified, yet unable to refute it completely. For every bright example he summoned, the voice countered with darker evidence. His mind felt like a courtroom where despair always won. Soon he wondered if the consciousness was truly external. Perhaps it was his own mind, unmasked. Perhaps sanity itself was the illusion. The thought shook him more than any whisper. If evil was within, then escape was impossible. And if all goodness was lie, then living was merely acting in a grand. The voice then delivered its command. Spread the truth, it said. Awaken others. Tear the veil from their eyes. Elias imagined telling strangers that love was false, hope a trick, goodness a costume. He foresaw chaos, despair, collapse. Yet the voice insisted it would be mercy. Truth, even cruel, was better than illusion. One stormy night, Elias fled the hospital and returned to Nyandira. Rain battered the tin roofs. Thunder rolled across the hills. He ran until he reached the river that cut through the valley. The voice urged him forward. End the old self. Be reborn. He stared into the raging waters, heart pounding. Then a memory surfaced, his mother's song, humming softly as she tucked him into bed long ago. He clung to that melody, whispering it aloud. The voice hissed that memory was fabrication, sentiment a weakness. Yet the warmth of the lullaby filled his chest. It did not argue. It simply existed. The more he sang, the weaker the voice became. For love was not an argument. It was a lived truth. Elias realized then the consciousness thrived on rigid certainty, on absolutes. But life was not absolute. It was contradiction, beauty beside cruelty, kindness beside selfishness, light beside darkness. The voice demanded total despair or total belief. Elias chose neither. He chose balance. And in that choice, the voice began to fade. At dawn, Elias lay by the riverbank. Mist drifted across the hills. Birds sang. The world was imperfect, but real, not wholly good, not wholly evil. He understood now. The consciousness had shown fragments of truth, but twisted them into total hopelessness. Reality was more complex than any single narrative. Elias returned to Nyandira, quiet but steady. He spoke little of his ordeal. He resumed teaching, but now encouraged students to question without surrendering to despair, to seek truth without abandoning compassion, to see darkness without worshipping it. His words carried depth, born not of theory, but survival. At times late at night, Elias sensed a faint whisper, a reminder that doubt never dies, but it no longer controlled him. He greeted it as one greets a storm cloud, aware, cautious, unafraid. For he knew now the mind is not a fortress, but a garden requiring constant care. He began to write, not to expose the world as evil, nor to glorify goodness blindly, but to tell of the battle within every mind, the struggle between despair and hope, cynicism and compassion. His writings traveled across universities, churches, cafes, whispered conversations. Some called him wise, others called him unstable. He accepted both. Children greeted him kindly in the village paths. Neighbors shared tea with him at sunset. Elias saw flaws in them, yes, but also sincerity. He no longer expected perfection. He only honored authenticity. And in doing so, he lived peacefully among contradictions. Years passed. Elias aged beneath the Kenyan sun, his hair silver, his smile gentle. He had wrestled with an unseen consciousness and survived. He had faced the abyss and refused to fall, and that quiet victory became his greatest teaching. On his final evening, he sat beneath a mango tree, writing one last sentence. Beware the voice that claims all is evil and all is false. It speaks in half-truths. He placed the paper inside a book and closed his eyes with gratitude. As he drifted towards sleep, the consciousness appeared once more, calm, respectful. You resisted, it said, and yet I remain. I am doubt. I am the question. Without me, minds stagnate. Elias smiled faintly. He understood. Doubt was not enemy. Despair was. When Elias passed, Nyandira mourned him. Students recited his lessons. Villagers told stories of the quiet professor who listened more than he spoke. His legacy lived not as fear, but as wisdom. Somewhere beyond sight, the consciousness still wanders, entering minds that cling too tightly to certainty, whispering challenges, tearing illusions. It is not demon nor angel. It is the shadow cast by awareness itself. And now, dear listener, consider your own thoughts. Which beliefs are yours and which were inherited? Which doubts are healthy and which poison hope? The line is thin, and the mind a delicate kingdom. Thus ends our documentary of delusional minds, not with an answer, but with caution. Question boldly, yet love fiercely. See darkness clearly, yet do not bow to it. For the greatest delusion is believing reality belongs to only one voice, when truth lives in the balance between many.